All right. So for today, just to run through this, I'll start at the start. I'm going to be using the Access Emulator, which you can get through Trimble Install Manager. A little bit different to the past when we had emulators. They tended to be on a case-by-case basis. So really it was there for the dealer network to be able to do some testing, troubleshooting, have it on their PC with a point limit, and just to assist in that sales cycle. When we migrated to Access 2018 and upwards to now 2019 versions, there was a little bit of a change in there so that more people could get familiar with the emulator and Trimble Access, and it helps with training, helps with just testing out functions. And what you'll see, my PC already has a license, but if yours doesn't, you should have a little Create Demo License button here in the Install Manager. What that does is it allows you to install the current release of Trimble Access. So it'll be for 2018, 2019. And so if you did it today, you'd be able to install 2019.11. And for the first 30 days, it comes with the ability to connect an instrument. So if you're very keen, you could walk outside with your laptop, connect to a GPS with Bluetooth, and be able to actually do some survey work with it. It does have a point limit of, now, I'm going to say 50, but it might actually be 30. I sometimes get that one mixed up. But after the 30 days goes by, and then it reverts back to still being an emulator. You can still play with all the functions in there, but it won't connect to physical instruments anymore. And it's just to, I guess, give you a period where you can use it for a little bit more experimentation. But then beyond that, it's using it as an emulator only. So what I'll do is jump into Trimble Access and show you some of the things we can do. Now, we revised quite a lot of Trimble Access and the workflow when we brought out this version. It maintains all the functionality that you would have seen in Trimble Access 2017 and below, which was the older user interface, and took all of that. I think probably one of the other things that really dropped out was supporting the 5600 instrument. No one's been using those for a fair while. And we improved the ability to synchronize. So this little icon up here is our Trimble Connect logo. And when we are logged in with our Trimble ID, in this case, here's mine sitting there logged in, it allows us to see what projects are sitting on the cloud and what projects are sitting on the controller. So if I turn off cloud, you'll see it drops back just to these simplified projects that are existent on the controller. We can also filter, for instance, if I type Smith, that's our survey mark inquiry service for Victoria and Australia, then it just starts to do a wildcard search, same with Canterbury. So we do have quite a few projects in there, but they are easy to filter depending on how we've been working and want to see things. Probably one of the main things to be aware of, and I think most people that have used this by now, if you want to synchronize to the cloud, then the project has to be created in the cloud initially. So if I click for a new project here, it doesn't actually build that project on the Trimble Connect cloud. So we're better to have a project existent in the office when we're in Business Center or Sync Manager or Trimble Connect Online or desktop, or there's a variety of ways we can do this, but as long as it's built on the cloud to begin with, then it'll have an upload download functionality as well. For what I'm doing today, I don't really need that too much, so I'll just put in, what's this called? This is the UPG TA webinar. We can have images like what you see in the Just go back one. Like what you see on changes yet. This front end where we've actually applied an image to some of these just to help identify different projects that we're working on. It gives us a little visual cue for what we're doing there and makes it a little bit easier to navigate. I find I always try to put in an image, but generally I'm starting in the cloud as well. But today the focus is around Trimble Access. Daily occurrence, I need to create a TVC rather than access. No, so I would probably, John, I'll just have a question come in there around creating new jobs. The jobs can be created on the controller. So for instance, I'll just jump back a second. Here's a job that's the project is in the cloud. And because the project is in the cloud, I can say new job. And let's say I call it the JM Special. And set up whatever I'd like to in there. Let's say it's this particular one and accept. That job's now existent only on the controller at the moment, but it also has the ability to say fieldwork complete and it will upload back to the cloud. It's really only this project level that needs to be created in Trimble Sync Manager or Connect beforehand. So yeah, there is a little bit of pre-work on the newer controllers though. We can do that on Sync Manager or something similar running in the field as well. Since that question's come up, there's no reason why you can't actually install this application on TSC7 just to make sure that that's something that if you do need to run that upload download and you want all of your projects to have that functionality, then creating them in here. It is something that we're discussing with the product group to make sure we can build out that functionality in the future as well, so that you don't need to run the additional step. But Sync Manager, once I just jump back one more project level, it really ability to create the project here, and it'll just make sure that it has that upload download function when we're in Trimble Access. Now, so what I'll have a look at, we'll just open up this one. To begin with, just for a little bit of speed and efficiency, we jump into our map screen. If you're only using one instrument type and you're using it all day long, so it might be that it's an S-series pedal station or a GNSS, initially you'll probably have something like this where it's actually searching for several different instruments because the default is there to make sure that it finds the full portfolio of products. But if you've only bought a Trimble Access controller with a GNSS, then by just changing this setting, it can actually improve the connection times between your controller and whichever instrument it is that you're trying to connect to at the beginning of each survey, because it doesn't have to cycle through trying to find connections. So little one doesn't take too long, but can make life a little bit easier. Now, I thought we'd start with the survey styles. This is like to some extent, we're kind of taking what I would run as little bits of training for new staff and onboarding and putting it out there. So some of this is probably a little bit old hat for people, but yeah, if you need anything answered while we move through different sections, just ping the chat window. I've kept it alive on the side there. So a couple of things. When we configure a lot of these controllers and send them out to people, we generally do what's called a build-up file so that they have a range of different survey styles that they have already embedded, and then they don't have to do it. Again, if you're only using it for GNSS or only using it for total station and you've got additional styles, rather than deleting them, because you might one day expand your product portfolio that you work with, just down here in the options, you can actually change this to say, I only want to see the functions around GNSS surveying. I'll click that. And straight away, we drop out all of the ones that are configured for integrated survey, SX10, S-Series, and any other ones that we've embedded into there, and vice versa. So you can clean that up, just makes it a little bit easier. If you're always working with an S-Series and that's it, then by switching these off, when you actually go to into measure, this screen actually disappears because there's only one option, so it directly shoots you into the options for a station setup or a use last. Similarly for RTK, if you've only got the one type of RTK, it drops out that additional menu, so it can just help speed things up a little bit as well. So let's have a look at RTK to begin with. We'll jump into the rover options here. Now, most of the time, I would say, in almost 99%, people are in connection with their base over radio or over internet, and they would rather know when it's had a significant dropout and they stop working. We do have some options though if you're coming up and down hills or in areas of interference and you're going to post-process. One of those is RTK plus infill, where we trigger a logging file in the background to occur when we lose our RTK. And the other one is RTK and logging, which is creating a logging file of all the satellite observables, the entire survey. For some government legislation, it's actually, we should be doing this in connections to state control, and a lot of the time this gets established through discussion of what type of surveys people are doing as they have their equipment delivered, so that if it's unnecessary to put this in, then we don't worry about it. With the broadcast formats, we've got a number of different options here. It's always best for Trimble to talk to Trimble formats. So if you've got two brand new receivers as a base and a rover configuration, then ideally you would use the CMRX option. It's a Trimble proprietary format that can compress and deliver the corrections nice and neatly packaged. For people running on a internet provided solution, there's an option for VRS where we're telling the survey style that we're going to have a virtual reference station, and it's going to be delivered over the CMR format as well. This one, multi-station, is there for what I would refer to as being a nearest base solution. So we might be working in a network, we begin near one particular base, and then as we work our way along, we begin to be closer to another base. It will actually hop to that next base so that its baseline is shortened. Down here, we define the antenna types. If this isn't correct, it will actually flag it when you start the survey and update. I tend to always put the default antenna height in here as well, because we generally always using a 2-meter pole. It's less likely to have something steering away from that with GNSS, and there's less often that you'll change the height of the pole like you do with the total station. If you do want the feedback of the serial number pushing through as part of the job QA, then you can fill that out here, or it's generally known from other means. The station index for the base, this actually triggers that we would only connect to a particular base index, but we can click on this, and when we initialize our RTK survey, it will give us a little bit of a listing of all of the corrections that it's able to receive at the time as well from different base identifiers. Down through here, signal tracking. One thing to note, because it does come up now and then, if I come to RTK plus logging, we can pick where we're logging to. Because of the limits we have of Bluetooth bandwidth, if I log to the controller, I'm only going to get a limited amount of satellite constellations. Once I go to log to receiver, then it opens back up to provide all satellite constellations. So if you did have a requirement where you needed to log as well as the real-time feed, I always recommend using the log to receiver option to be able to suck those files back out again. Exfil is leveraged off our satellite correction feed. What it does is it provides an interim solution when our real-time drops out. So as long as you can see the geosynchronous satellite that's providing our RTX solution, it's using that same technology, and it just does it for 5 minutes. And there's a sliding scale of dilution that as you get away from your real-time feed, it starts to estimate that the position's worth. Generally it performs better than the estimate, but it's there to indicate that something is amiss, but you can still survey with it as well. The auto tolerance that we have here, generally when we're surveying, up in the ribbon, we'll have a little icon that's a world symbol, let's say, for the internet-based corrections feed, and we get a tick once we achieve our convergence. On an auto tolerance, that's set automatically based on the satellite configuration and the baseline length. If we wanted something specific, then we can actually force a particular tolerance. So we wouldn't see that green checkbox until it achieved that that function there, that specific requirement there. Tilt functions for the R10 and R12, these enable the E-bubble to be switched on, and also performing what we call compensated points, where the receiver is inclined on an angle and taking measurements. We'll leave that on that setting for now and just accept. Data link for traditional RTK radio, there's really not too much to do in there, but for GNSS over corrections over internet, there's a little bit more that we can do and to know about. So a lot of this gets set up from the manufacturer, but if we jump in here, normally most people configure it that it connects directly to a particular mount point. So in the case of wanting in Australia to get a network solution of CMRX, so a VRS, and being delivered on GDA94, then it would be TVN_CMR_X. And usually that gets configured by the distributor. If you wanted to see all of the mount points available, then we click this to no, and as you initialize your survey, you'll get a listing of all of the mount points that are available at this IP address and this port, and they just help to be able to jump through different coordinate frames if that's there, or different correction types. So it might be RTCM or CMR, bearing in mind that the survey style in the let's just enter on that store, accept in the rover options should be configured for the same type there. Okay, around the topo point, I'll just quickly jump into here to put in that we have the same thing. Generally we have auto tolerance, but if you want to particularly to the topo point to achieve a certain accurate precision before the point is able to be stored, you can configure this down to get your own values in there, and it'll just force it to measure for more epochs as you go along. We do have some other functions if we've got the E-bubble switched on, like auto measure, where it will initialize the measurement once the bubble comes into the center of the circle. So if you're measuring just all existing surface levels across a paddock, you can click this in, and as you bring the receiver up to vertical, it will start the measurement, and then once it's measured on the TC7, you get either a sound or the haptic response, which is the little vibrator inside of it that makes it move. Then you'll be able to just keep on moving. Depends on how you want to run your survey, really. So yes. Now, okay. Store that for a second. For S-series instruments, and we ran a session a couple of weeks ago, just as a general Q&A, and this one came up, not everyone was familiar with. If we want to measure face left, face right, or face 1, face 2 all of the time when we're doing our station setup, then if I change this setting in here to configure it, then each time I do a station setup, it will automatically do a face left and a face right. Generally, we wouldn't be doing that for topo points unless there was particular requirement for that level of accuracy. We can also define here, do we want to measure the distance a second time, or is it just an angular measurement on the second face? If you have someone at the instrument, then you may want to turn off the auto lock for offsets, so something like a horizontal angle offset for positioning a tree, where you'll take the measurement next to the tree and then move the instrument pointing to the center of the trunk. If you're doing that by yourself, then you can click this off and it will still keep tracking during those horizontal angle offsets and allow it to move to the tree without having an assistant there to help you as well. Also, for the measurement mode, our normal default when we're starting a survey, it sits on standard so that we take a mean of a few observations. We can have it default to tracking so that it's getting a real-time update of all positions. Now, okay, one thing in the duplicate point tolerance is sometimes we'll observe a point a second time over and it will give a flag that it's not quite exact, but you can choose to store as another. If you have ever found that that's a little bit frustrating because you might be measuring the same point and it's only ever a few mil out and you want it to store the same thing, you can open up these tolerances so that when you measure back to control point A each time, it automatically stores without giving you that extra prompt that it's out of tolerance, because that would be taken care of in an adjustment later on anyway. Proximity check. We tend not to need this a great deal if we're using an active target where it's only tracking onto the prism. If you are using a non-active target where the potential for it to lock onto something and stay on that, let's say a road sign, and we're not being too organised in our survey, we might be a bit distracted, and it keeps hitting the one point and measuring again and again, then this is a function that can actually help identify those times where that happens, because if we have a point within this particular tolerance as a proximity check, it will flag and jump up on screen to say, you're actually trying to store a point that's very close to another point. Were you intending to do this? Okay. The other ones I'll leave alone for now. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. Echo sounders are a pretty niche area. Okay, so within the emulator, I'm sure you've all patched into Install Manager, created your licenses, and you should be looking at a screen similar to this, or you might go off and do it later. We're not connected to an instrument, but we want to have a play with some of the tools, and just as we release new functions, it's quite common that people want to jump in there, have a little bit of a play with it, explore it, and see how it functions. What we provide in here to be able to do that is when I hit on the menu icon and I come down to the About, it's hidden away a little bit. It is on the Trimble Access help portal though, which I'll reference to in a moment. We have a couple of little things under support, and one of them is Gnss Emulator. So this is here to allow us to simulate a a GPS feed, and it allows us to do a little bit of testing, playing around with coding and any other functions, and we can put it into a particular place in the world if we need to, so that it's consistent with the coordinate system that we've picked as well. So we define the base location, define the rover location. We can pick out what type of receiver we're actually going to use as well, and open the joystick. So I'll choose accept on that. There's a little bit of a tool in the background that runs, and we get a receiver on the screen. Now, I did just mention the Trimble Access help portal, and I'll just jump into that just so that you're aware of it as well, because there's a wealth of knowledge on here. Trimble Access help portal. So we get some videos from the product team. We can have a look at each app. We can also look at the PDF guides that we make available, or we can just jump through this top menu to find what we're after, or just a search. Now, the help itself is replicated in a local file. When we click on help, it will bring up here, because I've got the map screen open, comes straight into the map as being a, it's a particular term for it in computing, but it's sensitive to what we're doing at the time to try and help us get to the right area of the help menu. And that's available offline. This one replicates all of the content plus some more, and is in an online format too. Okay. So what we've got here, we can now move this around the screen. Actually, I better zoom in a little bit more. Tap and hold on the magnifier. Oh, move that out of the way for a second. And we keep coming down in. These points are at the base and the rover, basically the same point. What I'll do, we can see this simulated feed of 15 satellites coming in. I'm just going to go to Measure, RTK, and Measure Points. And oh, hang on. I better just jump back. I'm supposed to be getting a correction feed over over radio for this emulator. I must have left it stored the way I didn't want it. But you can see here when I've clicked on to have the mount points come up as I initialize my survey, I'm actually getting a listing. So here's the new Australian datum of 2020, and other areas would have similar things to this that allow you to pick out the datum as you come through. Yes, could not start base, that's okay. I'll just jump back into here quickly. RTK, rover. Okay, that was all fine. Doing all of that. And accept, and data link we'll put on radio, accept, store. The fun of live demos. Okay, this base index that we ask for a prompt comes through. We're saying we've got a base station index of 13 and it's 100% reliable. So that's an indicator of how good the radio quality is coming through. And we start survey. If we hit a little zoom extents, we can see the base station over there where I've just shifted around. So it looks exactly like it would when you're out in the field. One of the things we can do here, we can either jump this around, I'll zoom out a few times, and just move it in this way, or we can click on Fine if we were trying to perform a stakeout and wanted to go through that. This one on the side here is a vertical shift, and this one's the horizontal. But a lot of the time, if we're going through this and wanting to replicate what we do for feature coding, for instance, a tap and hold and move rover here just allows us to jump the rover to wherever we want. Now, some of the things that exist in the side menu that not everyone's familiar with, if I tap and hold on the zoom extents, rather than just going to zoom extent, I actually get that I can go to the previous zoom. I can view an area of interest. So what I might do is zoom right in like this, and I only want to see this at 5 meters, and I'm going to set that as my area of interest. So now when I'm off doing something else over here, I can say view area, and it pops me straight back into there. Really convenient if you've got a large site and you're working just in a small area and you're sort of zooming in and out. You might be hitting extent and it's a bit frustrating, it's getting away from you. Then setting up this helps with that. You can also have a secondary set where it might be that you want a set user zoom extent. So you might have that you're working on a particular building, part of that site, and that's our area of interest, but there's a larger property, and then 5 kilometers away we have the base station. We can set a user zoom extent, and then rather than coming out to wherever that base might be at 10 kilometers, when I hit this, I come back down to my 50 meters. So it's overridden the default extents of that. Some other ways of doing that, in our filter, we can switch off some of these things that are being displayed on screen. So we might want to switch off the base points if they're far away, and then our zoom extents wouldn't factor those in as we work through them. So using the filter to get rid of observations that you don't want to factor in on the screen at each time is quite a handy way of doing that quickly as well. Just move that across. Okay. Now, a couple of things I went through this morning on a separate session was applying map-based imagery. I'll just switch this on. It should be somewhere. Oh, might even, did I put it in the wrong spot? Might be for a different job, I think. That's okay. Okay, we'll just skip on that section, put it in the wrong spot. One thing I wanted to look at was the web map services. So in Trimble Access 2019 and the subsequent releases after that, we added in the ability to display a web map service in the background. So these, some of them are hosted from the government, and other ones you can host your own if you really wanted to, but they're a little bit more accurate than a Google map because they come with a projection. So you need your projection to align with the projection of the web map server, and then when you overlay that with your work, it becomes a little bit more straightforward for if you haven't prepared a base map image or some background data, it still allows you to see what you would basically navigate with on your phone or something similar. If I click on this, just click that off for a second, we can just define a new web map service. I'll just copy out this one and build it new again so that we can see the process here. For New Zealand customers, there is a web map server service that is operated by Gnss, and Alterra New Zealand would be able to provide some documentation of using that for the access controllers. Just copy that here, and I'm going to put this is TA webinar WMS. So we paste in our URL, and I'm using one that's from Geoscience Australia in Australia, and it gives a lot of topographic map-based information. There are ones specific to Victoria, one for VicMap. Queensland have one as well that I've got operational, and Western Australia have a few, but they seem to be all around geological maps. We're going through a bit of a process of testing each state and what we can find there. If anyone has any, I'm sure the Trimble community would appreciate you putting it on there if you've got one that's operating and for your area is quite beneficial. When I click on the coordinate system, it actually goes off and pings this URL and tells me what's available. Now, I know for MGA 2020 and Zone 55, I pick out this EPSG code. The EPSG codes are the international coding of different reference frames. We can load in multiple web map services at once. So if we were doing two, we would click one as being a base layer and the other as being a primary layer, and we might put an opacity on one or the other just so that you can see them both in the same instance without cluttering the screen too much. I'll hit accept on that, and so now we've got our new web map service. The only problem with some of these, and this comes into, is that what they provide is generally too much. So we've got all of these different layers, and if I just click this to say I want it on, like I would with my normal background maps, then what happens is we actually get everything on. So we can either selectively go through and put on what we want, but that can be a little bit annoying at times because as you come back in, or someone's not as familiar with what's going on, or you just accidentally hit it, then you've got to actually come back and just select out the ones that you want. There is some background things we can do here. I'll just jump into the system files. When we create these web map services, we create a little file that goes with them. So here it is. I'll grab it for the one I've just created, and I'm going to open with Notepad. Now, it lists out the URL and the EPSG code that I'm using, the other EPSG codes that are possible in there, but it also lists out all of these layers that it's possible to actually to use as well. And what we can do is just delete. Let's say, I won't delete everything, I'll just get rid of anything that referred to large islands. And I should be able to save, shouldn't give me a conflict. Now when I come back into Trimble Access, come down through here, I might need to reload that one moment, just escape. There we go. We've dropped out all of those large islands, and you can keep basically deleting those away until you get a suitable web map service. Now, just to show you what it looks like when it's running, we'll put on just a few in here. Put the built-up areas. I'm just running the ones at 250K that would come through in a normal 250K map series. I'll put the reserves and we'll chuck on the roads, accept. And zooming out here, we start to see it build up that roads network. For people operating this and wanting to use it more, it does cache at a particular zoom level. So as I move around and I'm not zooming in or out, the maps for this area are stored. But when I zoom in and out and I start to capture more or less data, it recaches so that we're not building up. If for some reason we zoomed out to the extent of Australia and then came back in, we're not leaving that information of the full extent of Australia in there so that we don't slow down the map interface too much. I'm not actually sure where I started this base off in the world. Yeah, it is near my house, that's okay. Now we can see that becomes a little bit useful at times, and it depends. The Vic Map series for Victoria has a lot more detail than what the Geoscience Australia one has for the same area, just because they're only focused on a state-by-state basis. So it becomes a little bit easier in doing that. Okay. Cad Toolbar. Over at the side here, you might see this little interface for the Cad Toolbar. And it did exist in earlier versions of Trimble Access, but only on the tablet controller. So for people using the Yuma 2 tablet with versions of Trimble Access 2017 and below, it was existent in there, but because it was only on a certain controller, it didn't get as much use, or not many people even knew that it was there. We've reintroduced it with Trimble Access 2019 and upward. And what this allows us to use is all of the control codes that we might have in our feature code library. So I did just open up a default job here in Business Center, purely just to show you what these feature code library control codes are. So this is just the generic feature code library from Trimble. And I come in here. For line control codes, then as we're doing our survey, and we want, a lot of people will use numeric stringing to separate their lines. So it might be that the bottom of a bank 01 is how we differentiate it from bottom of bank on the other side of the road, which might be 02. However, you can also, and what some people like to do, is use start and stop codes, or pen on and pen off codes. I've heard them called as well. So if I was doing bottom bank, I can append that with an ST to start line, and then an end to end line. Now these don't have to remain like this. You can actually use the action and give it any code. So for instance, some people like to put a full stop, or 2 full stops for end and 1 full stop for beginning. And that would allow you to quickly start and stop strings without having to use numeric stringing. We'll just jump out of that for a second. Similarly, smooth curves, tangent arcs, offsets, joining points, creating circles, creating rectangles. There's a number of different tools in there, and also some vertical offsets. We also have control codes for what we call as block codes. So these are a CAD block. So it might be that you are surveying a pit, for instance, and when you've created that block, you have a fixed size and it has 1 insertion point. But for instance, if you had a rectangle that had 3 insertion points, you can still choose to survey it just with the 1 or with 3. And some of this, let's find a block code. So an arrow, in its properties, the insertion point is being defined as either from the control code, so where we pick out that we want to do it from 1, 2, or 3 points, or we can force that action that as we use this code of A, then we use A twice, and it automatically uses those 2 sequential codings to apply the scale and rotation to that block. So these can be quite handy, and the reason we put them with a little bit more profile into Trimble Access was just to help people using them, because it's not too hard to, actually, did I define, make sure I defined a feature code library in here? Yes, I did. Okay. Okay, just I'll use my custom zoom extents, come down to here, and let's say it's BB, bottom bank. I could put in my start line code here as well, but it means you've got to memorize them. So what we can do instead is hit on our start line code, and then simply measure. And then I'll move the rover. Oh, move rover. And measure. move over. And we might want to end that string there, and measure. One of the, just move it over to here for a moment. One of the ones that I guess is probably underutilized, we can create codes for line work that have a fixed offset where you're, let's say, actually observing the invert of a curb, but you want to create line work for the lip and the top and the back at the same time. And that relies on knowing what those parameters are. We can define that in here as well. So there is an offset control code where we can pick out how many lines we want to choose to offset. And it might be that we'll do 0.3, caps lock, at 0, and then we'll do 0.5 with a vertical offset of 1 meter and 1 meter. So now we have our code here for that, and we can still use our numeric stringing if we wanted to. And I'm going to hit measure there, and I'll jump up, move over here, and measure again. And what we start to see is we've created a series of offsets that can easily be, just zoom out a little bit. It's a bit difficult without the context of all the survey measurements coming in sometimes. We can see that they jump up and down as per how we define those offsets. And then when I want to remove them, hang on, sorry. When I want to remove them, I can just delete and go back to doing my standard, I think it was BB was the code I was running, and 01. And when we go back to top and extend and move the rover, and do another measurement now. And from that last one, we just drop back down to a single stringing again. Where are we? So just to jump into one other one that I wanted to cover. You never get through as much as you think you will. We'll go into measure codes. And there's my little e-bubble from the GPS. Now, this has been set up, in this case, I've made these groupings in the office, and I've put some letters in front of them. It's not case sensitive, but it is sensitive to A being the first, B being the second, C being the third, and so on. So what we can do with our keyboard functions, if we're doing a survey and we've got a lot of different elements, and it tends to be relief and road, or relief and, oh, touched the trackpad by accident, relief and rail or drainage, then what we can do is use the keyboard on our TSC7 to jump to different groupings. So you can see there, as I tap A, B, C, then we start to get different groupings. Let's say bottom of bank into that one. Top of bank into that one. I won't go overboard, we're running short of time. And so on, these can be added and jumped between. When we configure these measure codes, we can also put in however the software that we're going to wants to take these on. For running into Trimble Business Center, it's not fussy about this, it supports all options, but some particular office softwares don't like different string suffixing if you use that technique. This little one uses attributes of base code. When we configure our feature code library, this one, bring up its properties, we actually set up some attributes around this as well. So do we want to use numeric codes only, maximum length of feature codes, and what it does is it means that it's reading out these attributes so that when we're in Trimble Access, it's got a little bit more knowledge around what it will be dealing with. I've just set that to 0, 1 at the moment, and as I click 0, 1 here, we'll just move the rover. And do a measure. And then move the rover down to here. And another one. So if I jump into another grouping where I don't see any visibility around what I've actually recorded on the other one. So let's make it a little bit more difficult for ourselves. We wanted an uncluttered screen, so we didn't have the code switched on. But we were running similar codings in multiple groupings just because it was convenient for certain areas of the job. Now, when I come over to here, and I'm still doing a top of bank in a different area, but I'm not seeing what string number I'm up to. Because we've got the attributes of base code switched on, then this find function will find this. In this case, I haven't set this to have the same string suffixing. There we go. So it automatically sweeps through all of the groupings, all of the measured codes so far, and finds out what the next string would be in that sequence, so that it makes it a little bit easier to avoid overlapping codes when we're using that. That's if we wanted to go down that path, and sometimes the CAD commands, CAD Toolbar, is just as useful. I did want to, and I'll just bring up a slide deck just to make sure I covered off some of the tips and tricks from the experts. Now, when we're running Trimble Access in the field, because it occupies the entire screen, and we might still want to run it as a Windows PC, just to make it a little bit easier, some of the Windows shortcuts that help you are Windows D. That will minimize everything down to the desktop so that you can access the Windows interface behind running Trimble Access. When you are actually in Trimble Access and you want to swap between multiple tabs and screens, then Alt-Tab will allow you to do that. So for instance, here I've got measure codes. If I do Alt-Tab, oh, hang on, that's from, no, sorry, Alt-Tab swaps between programs, it's Control-Tab. Control-Tab also swaps us between map, measure codes, measure points, however many forms that we have operating at the time in Trimble Access. So that's Control-Tab. Alt-Tab will swap between programs in general. Well, we covered off the additional functions in the map screen. Some of the ones you may not be aware of. To close, we do Control-Q. If we wanted to go straight into the review job with a hotkey, it's just Control-R. Notes, Control-N. To measure a check shot, this is one that I should actually use more often, is Control-K. What we also have here is a system of favorites and hotkeys. So when we're on the TSC7, we actually have 12 function keys. Not sure, hold on a second. Actually, probably easier just to put it on. Where's the TSC7 photo in here? Maybe it's not. But we have function keys just below the main screen and also just below the numeric keypad and above the keyboard. We can use those to be defined by this. we can have a favorite, which will pop up in this favorites menu. We can also use a function key, so that will be F1 through to F12 on the TSC7s, or we can define both. And if we click for both, this allows us to say, okay, when I'm in Trimble Access, F1 is now measure points, and so on. Basically, any function can be referenced in there and used in that way, just to easily jump between. Okay. Auto connecting, conventional survey tips. We won't worry about collimation. That's very specific to SX10. Okay. Any questions there? We'll run a bit over, but so for web map services, John, yes, we do need internet connection running for web map service. If you're in areas that don't have a web map service, don't have internet coverage, or it's not the workflow that you would primarily use to have a SIM card in the controller, then what I would recommend is what I was discussing this morning with Trimble Business Center and Trimble Access working together. Where have I put these in? I might just jump to this file, I think. I've had too many jobs open at once in here. I'll use this one. So this is loading PDFs as backgrounds that we can use in the field using a capture from TBC. Alternatively, if I turn those off, if we prepare this in the office beforehand, and let's say we want an aerial image and also a map view, then from TBC, just using the base maps, the background maps, then put it into map view. Through the properties of the project, we can change from the digital globe imagery to Trimble Map View, which is powered by OpenStreetMaps. And if we wanted to load, I'll find something with an actual street intersection, look a bit more reasonable. If we wanted to load these into Trimble Access, then what I find is the easiest way and most consistent way is just to use this capture tool. And you can see here I've already done a few, but give it a name. We'll call it map for TA. We hit apply, and it just creates, in this instance, I've selected that I want a TIFF file, which I tend to find work more consistently. So that was visible on my plan view screen at the time. So that becomes an image by itself. But where this has the most benefit, which job am I in Leopold? Desktop. Leopold. We get these snapshots, and if I put what they're called, map for TA, if I put the TIFF file into the Access controller along with the TIFF world file, then it will be automatically georeferenced, and there's no need to be online. You can get from different government agencies, sometimes they provide an ability to get an aerial image or a background image as a TIFF file containing a TIFF world file as well. But if you don't have that through your government agency, then a simple version is using the Trimble Business Center embedded background maps, just doing a capture and then utilizing that to take through to the field. Sort of gone through a number of things. It wasn't aiming for this not to be too formal. Is there any questions that you've got for this one from anyone else there? Or? It's an unnerving thing when there's no verbal feedback. I could have dropped out and been talking by myself for hours now.
I'll jump in, Shep, and I'll ask you a couple of questions.
Yeah.
So notice when you're in Trimble Access before and you were running those strings, and you started and ended a string using the functions in obviously the map screen.
Yep.
Would you use that instead of using string numbers? And then when loaded into TBC, it obviously defines a start and end string and will lump them all together. Or because I know there's still some convention of the old school surveyors still using string numbers. What would you recommend? What's your thoughts on it?
I think depends on the complexity of the survey. If you were running cross sections on a road, and let's say you had traffic management, you had a limited amount of time to push across and do all of the curb strings, several lanes, and then the other side curbs, I would use string numbering still. But I think the benefit here, and depending on what agency it's going to and what their requirements are, things like smooth curves or tangential arcs or arcs in general, creating rectangles, they can be managed a little bit more easily, and you basically, your prism pole or your GNSS pole becomes a great big pencil. You're drawing what you're expecting to see on that plan when you're out in the field. You can use them. You might still start and stop your strings with numeric identifiers. If I just jump back to this settings here and put on the codes, still start and stop them with zeros like this, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, but you could then start to add in things like, let's go BB, BB03, and I might want to start arc. Actually, I'll remove that for a second. I want a straight before a tangential arc, don't I? Silly boy. Okay, move over and start my arc, measure, move over here. I'm going to end my arc, over and measure, and then we fit that little arc. For some government authorities, you're not allowed to do that. You'd have to actually take a lot of measurements with certain chord requirements. Really depends on the survey requirements that you're hitting as well. But even more generally, if you're doing open parkland, concrete tends never to be straight. You might just want a nice smooth curve that looks nice on screen. It plots better. It's a better representation of what's actually there rather than chording your measurements. And it becomes quite easy to do because it's active in the side panel. It's nice and neat. Once you know what the icons actually represent, then it's kind of an additional function there. I still use it in combination with the numeric strings. I tend not to just start and stop a string when I'm discussing it and running any training or whatever it might be. I just find it's a flexible way of combining in the other control codes. But there are, I guess there's times, I did all of my surveying with start and stop strings when I first started, but that was with an ancient data collector called an MC5, so it's going back a fair way now. It didn't necessarily have all the other functions that we had on newer controllers as well.
Too easy, thanks for that.
Yeah, not a problem. Once again, if there's any follow-up questions or you want something specific covered in these webinars that UPG/SciTech have been kind enough to put on, then just let the team at UPG SciTech know, and we'll be able to facilitate those over the next period. I think we might be getting out of the worst of it with our isolations and shutdowns and lockdowns, but I think it's been a great tool to begin a bit more web presence, and even going on past this, I'm sure we'll maintain a little bit more online content and and keep this series going. Probably not 2 a day, but ability to keep putting things up here and discussions as people are keen on it.